Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. Let's get started. Good morning, America. How are you? Don't you know me? I'm your native son, Randy Daly, broadcasting from Kenai, Alaska, where it is dark 30. Well, actually, technically, O is pronounced dark 30, but it sounds better because it goes with, oh my God, what happened to the sun? There is a balmy 17 degrees outside right now, except we have no humidity, so it's just plain, flat, 17 degrees and dark as your mother-in-law's heart. This is To the Bone, a podcast of everything athletic where we ask a lot of questions and sometimes upset people because we're asking questions. But the whole point here is to have a conversation about how to make athletic training better. Your host, Shelby Daly, is with us, just back from a game. How'd the game go, Shelby?
Pretty good. Field hockey today, so smacking some balls around.
Whacking. Oh, don't go there. It's too early for that now. We're also joined by Brian Hortz ATC. Now, Brian is Director of Research and Education at Structure and Function Education. He's an adjunct professor at AT Stills and adjunct faculty at Ohio State. Go Buckeyes!
It was a great place, not last weekend, but most weeks that's good.
All right, so let's kick things off. Shelby and Brian, how did you guys get to know each other in the ATC community?
Oh, well, Brian rolled into Anchorage, Alaska, teaching some dry needling skills during COVID. So that was my first dry needling course through Structure and Function, which was amazing. Definitely different times then, but I've done a few more courses with Brian and ran into him in Arizona and then recently in Pennsylvania, where I helped TA a course. So what did you think of Alaska?
Oh, I loved Alaska. In fact, I'd love to get back up there again. We're going to try to do that in 2025.
Nice.
It was interesting because coming out of COVID, we had all these rules that now we know weren't rules really, right? Like 6 foot distancing and masks and all of the things. And we had a perfect spot there in a CrossFit gym where we could spread people out. The only issue then was I had to fill that space with my voice. By Sunday, I could barely speak by the time I got on the plane. But it was a blast. I loved, and it was great to get out and teach again after having months off. Right? It was a good time. I always appreciate having you in class in Philly this last time, and anytime we get a chance to interact, as your father said in the introduction, a lot of times in our profession, people get a lot of heat for asking questions, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to ask them. And part of the reason why I wanted to be on here is just to kind of encourage you. I think you're doing great stuff.
Thank you.
I'd throw in a blunt needle joke here, but it'd be pointless.
Well, I was going to say during COVID, weren't we doing the dart system where we were just throwing it at people and trying to get it?
I remember there was a PT in that class who was precious, who brought us all shields. Remember the face shields?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, we're already all wearing masks, and that's hard enough. But she was like, if anyone wants a shield, I mean, we really when you look back on it, we had no idea what we were doing. We really didn't.
My goodness. Oh, my God. Well, I guess I have you to thank, because when Shelby comes back to the house, so this is like, the Daly family estate in Kenai, Alaska. So when one of my daughters is needs, some humanity, they'll all come back. I keep their rooms for them. But she always brings back something from the industry. And it's like, hey, Dad, why don't you lay down over here? I'm going to put a bunch of steel needles in you. So how about that? We do that. I need some practice. So thank you for the experiences that Shelby has shared with me, Brian.
It's the free healthcare. Yeah. That's all you want.
Yeah, exactly. But
free
it's it
healthcare.
it is it is a prime example of the ways athletic training has changed, right? I think as the educational changes have come in, and we could talk about that a million different ways, right? Everybody's got their opinion on that. But the one thing I will say is it's opened doors to expand practice in a lot of states where they've been forward thinking, where things like dry needling and intramuscular injections and suturing and all kinds of invasive techniques that weren't part of athletic training before are now coming in and being taught, and you see more and more athletic trainers kind of expanding their toolbox beyond what we traditionally did in the traditional settings. And I think that's always a positive. I think it opens a lot of doors for athletic trainers to go in a lot of different directions with a lot of different skills, and that's ultimately probably been the one of the many good byproducts of the changes that we've had over the last decade.
Now, you've been at this a little while, and obviously you've been very successful at it, Brian. What's your favorite thing to do as an AT?
I still love patient care. I'll be honest with you. Like, as much as I teach and I travel the country teaching things and I enjoy teaching, like getting one-on-one time with patients when you can actually help someone get better, and see the trajectory of them from an ailment all the way back to being, a high performance athlete again it's the most rewarding part of what we do. And in fact, I was just on a call this week where someone asked me, would you want to go back to full-time academics and no clinical responsibilities? And I'm like, I don't even know what that would look like, and I don't know how I would be happy doing that, right? Like, there's always got to be some form of patient care in my practice, in some practice time, or I don't know that I could really truly be happy. But yeah, so I guess my answer is like it's that one-on-one interaction with either with a student, right? Like Shelby, who's for years since my class, right? We still
Hmm.
keep in touch and we interact off and on, and get a chance to bounce ideas out, or an athlete where you see them over time grow,
Hmm.
change, right? All of those things are the most rewarding part of what we're doing.
Well, and I think there's also that dissemination of information and new techniques that's kind of exciting.
Hmm.
We were actually, I was in Philadelphia. Was that just last week?
Yeah.
So we were in Philadelphia just last week, and we were happened to be over at Penn Med, and the subject of some of these alternative treatment protocols came up. We were actually talking with one of their electrocardiologists. What's the word?
Electrophysiologist.
Oh my God, that's a lot of syllables. Anyway, so there's a guy who's on the very traditional side of heart surgery, and some very high specificity in what he does. Making up words as we go along, so don't be bothered. But you got to be on your game to be a heart surgeon, and so it was really cool to see him be open to dry needling. I think cupping came up in the conversation, and it was very cool to work with a professional who didn't have a preconceived judgment about it and just said, "Oh, really?" And then was open to learning more about how that was helping with treatment.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's kind of like goes all the way back what Rogers' diffusion of innovations, right? If you guys have ever read
Oh, yeah.
anything, you're right. You get like the 20% of people that have a mindset that's kind of a growth mindset, a let's try it mindset, a kind of out in front mindset, and then you've got another 20% that are see what the leaders are doing and follow them quickly, right? And then you always have the laggards on the far end, right? That never are ever going to be down with whatever's going on. And I feel like we're starting to move in athletic training practice into kind of that second 20%. But we're also interacting with physicians and mentors and other professionals in other areas. And I feel like the ones that are more progressive in their own practices tend to be more open to, opening doors and allowing us to continue to kind of be progressive in ours. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to get patients better, right? And if a cup, whether it's the most scientifically sound thing in the world, we could argue based on the literature one way or the other, if it makes a patient feel better and they move better, that's all I care about. And so and many physicians are kind of at least forward thinking enough to say, hey, if it works, let's try it, right? And let's see, and let's start to continue to study it.
Well, and I think that the ongoing study is a thing because I think, well, cupping, I think is you were talking there. I mean, the Chinese have been doing that for probably the Orient, Asia, however you want to classify it, have been doing that for potentially thousands of years. And like you said, if it's working, maybe the research we got to do is how and why does it work?
Mm.
I mean,
You're right. Yeah,
somebody.
you're right in my wheelhouse. So Eastern medicine has been built on observational medicine for thousands of years, right? So they
Mhm.
just try something and see how it works. And we are bound in the Western medical mindset on randomized control testing and things that we learned from pharmaceutical meds.
Mhm.
And they don't often work well when you take certain types of treatments into that paradigm. Like, if I'm going to have Shelby on a table and she's part of my research study, and I'm going to blind her to whether I'm sticking a needle in her body,
Mhm. Right.
how is that going to work? Right. Like, and so, does she not going to know that I poked her with a needle and stuck a needle in her body, or 20 of them? And
Mhm.
so what ends up happening is the methods of the studies have these quote unquote flaws based on the
Mhm.
way those things are. And so they throw all the information out and say it's worthless.
Right.
Instead of,
Right.
whereas in other fields, that's not the case. Like, even think, like, let's go kind of really obscure. Well, I guess not really obscure. Public health epidemiology.
Mhm.
Everything there is association, and no one association is causal, right? In fact, we
Mhm.
have that argument about everything. But if you have hundreds and thousands of associations that happen over and over and over and over again, right? You get kind of this consensus, like, this
Mhm.
thing might have an association. You know what I mean? Like, this thing might be meaningful
Right.
in terms of disease. And for some reason, we've adopted this super strict randomized control mindset in Western medicine around our tools, and I don't think it serves us well.
Well, and the other thing you run into is there's this comfort level that happens with the status quo. And I forget which book I was reading it in, but they were talking about this problem they were having in hospitals with post-operation infections. And so there was this, they had figured out where infections came from. And so they had these protocols in place, and they said, okay, yeah, we're going to make sure that things are clean and, the whole things that we take for granted today. But then they got so comfortable with it and so confident that they had handled it that they started injecting kind of new variables and got lazy with their protocols. And I
Yeah.
think it was actually a European hospital where they kind of finally came to the conclusion, God, you know why we have such a high rate of infection is that the doctors are going to the morgue to practice on cadavers and not washing their hands when they go to work on live patients.
Yeah.
Holy
Yeah.
cow! We
Yeah.
knew you had to wash your hands. What
Yeah,
happened?
that's a great kind of thing that Atal Gawande, if you've ever read his books, Better and Complications, and he's got a whole series as a physician surgeon.
Hmm.
He goes back. He has several chapters that talk about exactly that. It's almost like flying a plane. Like, if you want to cut down surgical infections, you need a checklist, right? And everyone needs to hit every piece of this checklist
Hmm.
every time they walk into a room and before
Hmm.
they leave. Like, and we know how to do it, but we get lazy and we skip step here, here, here,
Right.
and then all of a sudden infections go up. Yeah, he's got a great set of books for people who want to kind of get interested in Atal Gawande. It starts Better, I think, is the one where he talks about that. But Complications was the first one. They're great. They're a great set of reads he has. He's a surgeon that writes really stupendously and gives you a kind of insight into medicine and its foibles.
Outstanding. Well, I'm making notes, so it's of the 1,000 books that I have behind the monitor here. I think we can make room for a couple more.
Add a couple more.
That's
So
it.
Shelby, you moved from a state. You learned in a state that had a certain practice act. Then you moved to California where there was no practice act, and we can
Yeah.
talk about the new thing that they just got, which is not really a. Everyone keeps saying they have a practice act. It's not a practice act. It's title protection, which is different. But
Yeah.
but then now out to Philadelphia, which is kind of a more restrictive practice act. So, like, I would love to hear you talk about that experience and how it's impacted your practice and the types of things you can and can't do.
Yeah. So yeah, going from California where it was the Wild West where you could basically do whatever you wanted to an extent. I think that really paired well with how I learned things of kind of connecting different aspects of manual therapies or treatments or even thought processes and going down the rabbit hole. Obviously, I'm still doing that, but in Pennsylvania, it was definitely a culture shock of, oh, I can't dry needle. I think I kind of got around it to an extent. Just had to ask a lot of permissions ultimately. And, now I'm kind of at the hospital, so now I'm very limited just because of my job responsibilities. But, while I was working with the soccer team here, it was definitely a little bit more eye-opening. Even just doing the process of getting my licensure was quite a headache. It was a pretty quick turnaround moving from California to Pennsylvania, in that I think it was about a month and a half. And then I didn't really realize how long it was going to take to get licensure. And I think it ended up being about 3 months to
Yeah,
actually
and
get
see, and
it.
that's just craziness.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem, which is why they're talking about the compact. I don't want to cut you off, but we'll come back to that when you're
Yeah.
done with this walk.
Yeah. And so, it was just how in depth it was, the child protection, background check, going and getting my fingerprints, and then you got it all done, and then there was no way to actually check the process. So I remember waiting on calling multiple times and being like, what else can I do? Like, I really need this to go through. Um, but they didn't really even have a way to know where I was in line to get it. And it was silly because it was graduation time when I moved here. So then I was lumped in with all the new grads that were, just got BOC certified and waiting for their licensure ultimately.
Yeah.
So I think Nevada, not sure about Nevada, but I've heard Nevada and Pennsylvania basically have kind of the same standards. So if I was going to get my licensure in Nevada, it would be a pretty quick turnaround just because I've already gone through most of their
Yeah.
standards already in
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
and that's the hope with the compact, right? So one of the big things they're trying to solve with this national compact discussion that we're having now, and I actually just got an email a couple weeks ago. I'm going to be on the committee that's going to DC to help write that piece of legislation. And I think part of the reason I got picked was I was a licensing board chair for 9 years, right? And we wrote our legislation and kind of helped push it through our group with the OATA when we changed our licensing laws. So I've kind of been involved in the regulatory side for quite a while now. But the whole point of that is, to try to get as many states to allow portability to be an easy thing. Like if I'm already licensed in one state and I've got no issues there where someone has filed a complaint against me, or I've got a license suspension or revocation there, then why shouldn't I be able to at least begin practice while all of these processes go on, and try to find some way to kind of have a legislative blanket that all states can sign on to ultimately as a goal. That'll never happen because Texas won't do anything anybody else does. But to the degree that you can get as many states as possible and make it easy for people like you or me to get licenses in multiple states if we're practicing in different areas. Or, it's particularly problematic for me when I was on the board. Like we'd have people living in Ohio that are licensed in Ohio but practicing in Pittsburgh, right? Because it's right across the state line. And now they got to have another license over there. And
Yeah.
then, which one are you functioning under where you are if your high school is in Ohio, but you're centered and your physicians are in Pittsburgh, right? It creates a whole bunch of issues that, you hope we can eliminate with a compact and allow a bit more portability, a bit more ease for athletic trainers moving from state to state to get a practice going quicker. Because, those if you have to hardcore fingerprint yourself and send it off to DC and get it back, that can take a long period of time, right? And
Yeah.
so, and certain states still have those restrictions. And so, the hope with the compact is that we open up and we get enough states that it makes that less of an issue for most athletic trainers when they're, moving job to job. And I think the nexus of a lot of this was actually just military brats that had medical degrees, right? And they might be spouse to someone who's getting bounced from base to base and state to state from year to year, and then they had to sit out for 4 or 5 months and not work because they couldn't get a license, right? And we
Yeah.
make all kinds of loopholes in licensing and regulatory laws for those people, but it just makes sense for all of us, right? Like we all have the same issue. Why is it more of an issue for that person than it is, if my wife were to take a job somewhere and I got to, get a license somewhere else? So the hope is we can kind of clean that up a bit with this compact and get something written in broad enough form that like lots of states will kind of buy into it and allow for people to be a little more portable.
Well, and I think I think that's where with this job what's going on with the job market is I think there are a lot of people that are willing to move to other states, but it's getting the licensure there is what is holding them back ultimately, because especially these border cities, I mean, Philadelphia and New Jersey, at the hospital, somebody had to wait, a month or two. They were hired, but they couldn't start working because they didn't have their license yet. And it's very frustrating ultimately.
Now, in your work on this, Brian, in other industries, they're on the same pathway. So when you look at regulatory and licensee requirements, I know in Alaska, in certain industries, there's like a group of 14 states that have all said, you know what, we're all going to use the same language, and we'll go into paragraph 1 and change Alabama to Alaska. But otherwise, we're going to all work on the same rules. And for licensing, the only extra thing you'll have to do is you'll just have to pass an examination that identifies the differences peculiar to that state. So in other industries, it's like, okay, well, in the non-discrimination clauses, okay, in certain states we have these, and then in this state they have, oh, we're going to specifically address this one other thing that isn't part of the canon.
Yeah, and if people don't get like legislation, like it's a super political process to begin with, but also there's what's in statute, which is the law, right, that has to be followed. But so much of what the mechanisms in place to regulate things are actually in law and rule, which are adopted by the board themselves. Right. So you can change those. You can change the laws and rules at any given time without touching the legislation. And if we had more states like you're describing where the legislation is similar and then you start to tweak laws and rules, then all you have to do is test people on your laws and rules. Right. What are the nuances of your state that differ? And it makes it way easier. Yeah. You just take like a jurisprudence type of an exam to make sure you understand their law and their rules and how it impacts your practice. And I think I would hope that that's where we're going to land on this, Randy. Like that's my hope.
Well, and it brings together, one of the challenges is you look at where the history of laws come from. And so, in America, we have like 49 of the states have an English common law background. And then there's one state that's French. It's like, well, we probably along the way need to kind of streamline that a little bit so that, like you said, that basic group of the stuff passed by the legislature, and that's what a lot of people, like you said, don't understand. You pass a law in the legislature, and so it is a law because the House and the Senate and the administration sign off on that law. And it's like the 30,000-foot view of the law, and then how you actually put that law out is all in the regulations. And so the regulations don't have to be voted on by the legislature. The regulations are how we're going to do this day to day. And like that's where your differences show up between the different states. But if you all agree on that overall canon and just go, like we said, hey, that state over there, they got a good, I don't want to spend the money to rewrite all of this minutia. Let's use theirs and change a couple of words.
Yeah. And to the degree that we can get people on board with some baseline, that would be great. I don't think we're going to get people to rewrite their licensing laws per se, but at least if we can say as a compact group, you're comfortable with people from Ohio who have no issues or people coming from X state with no issues to practice and take a jurisprudence exam until all of those months of things clear their hurdles, right? And then if there's an issue, then we could do something there. I mean, that's one way that you could monitor it. I mean, we had the same problem Shelby ran into for years. And when I wasn't the board chair yet, but I was on the board where we went to the electronic fingerprinting of the FBI database locally rather than sending the fingerprints. That saved like a month to 6 weeks in people's application processes, right? Like there are things you can do as states to kind of expedite that. And the other thing is you used to have to wait for a board meeting to get approved. Well, board meetings sometimes would be every other month. Right. So then we just wrote in law that and rule that the chair, like there's a full-time staff there. If all the ducks were lined up and there was no issue, they were able to issue a temporary license until that meeting. right?
Right.
And so, I mean, there are ways around it, and it really kind of aggravates me to hear Shelby's story,
Mhm.
because as a former board member, like, there are ways to keep that process much more streamlined without making it drag on, for 4 months at a time.
Well, and that's the crazy thing. 'Cause I was reading some law in another industry, and it turned out they only meet once a year. I was like, oh my God, how do you get anything done? Talk about,
Yeah,
rubber stamping the status quo. Holy
yeah.
cow.
Yep.
So
And
yeah,
that's where
tip of
you
the
get,
hat.
yeah. But then that's where you also get kind of the libertarian side of things. And this is starting to happen. This is actually kind of pushed athletic training in some states to update their laws. Because if you meet that infrequently and you haven't changed your law since 1984, then why
Mhm.
have the law? Right? It's
Right.
obsolete. Right. So
Mhm.
they sunset their laws. And what they found is certain states were trying to get rid of their licensing boards in
Hmm.
states that had them, and they were like, well, if you haven't updated your law since 1979 or 19, like, ours was 1984, and we just updated, I think it was in 22. Right.
Hmm.
So that's a really long time for a medical profession to have no updates to their practice act. Right. So, you know what I mean? The practice has not changed since 1984 for athletic trainers. I mean, obviously it has.
I,
So,
I'm just
it,
thinking of what my modem looked like in
yeah,
1984.
right.
It was
Exactly.
its
It's
own box.
crazy. And so I think actually that sunsetting and a lot of the states' legislatures pushing back to kind of regulatory reform. Let's get rid of some of these boards.
Hmm.
Why are we spending money on them if they're not really doing anything? Has forced us to innovate our licensing laws and update them and expand practice and make the changes that we should have been making all along of that process, which I think is good.
Yeah.
Well, I had a question about when we send in our paperwork. I'm sure it's different state to state, but obviously you're sending it to the state government. How hard would it be to partner with the state government to have an athletic trainer there just pushing paperwork through, I guess? I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
how do you do it better?
yeah, there are lots of ways to do that. I mean, I mean, we had an enforcement staff that was a branch of the Assistant Attorney General's office. So you had someone that was a paralegal or some legal background in the office every day. I'm like, if they can't figure out whether you've taken the right classes or not based on your transcripts, like, we got issues. Right.
Hmm.
So, why not turn it over to those people to expedite these things instead of all of it being laying at the feet of the board members, who are volunteers, generally appointed by a governor,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And like, to your point, Randy, we only have meetings every 2 months or every 3 months, right? Like, so why have people wait when you have competent people in the office that can expedite these things and push them through? My guess is in Pennsylvania, the biggest hangup was the fingerprinting and FBI database thing, because that we used to have that same process, and it took an inordinate amount of time, and so we started to go into the digital fingerprinting thing, and unless you can get that changed in rule, right, then you're still stuck with whoever wrote that thing had to be mailed and sent to the federal government to get a
Hmm.
response. And to your point, at any given time, how many people are trying to get TSA approvals, pre-check approvals, who are trying to get, global entry approvals, athletic training, physicians, like, all of these people are going through the same process. That's the reason they collected it and created the electronic database, so that they didn't all have to go there. Like, so let's, like, beef up our laws and rules and take advantage of it.
Well, and the funny part is I was luckily in Alaska right before they approved me, but the one thing I was missing was a background check from Alaska. And so me and my mom, I got the email while we were driving. I was like, let's go to State Troopers. They literally printed out my background check in less than 5 minutes and
Yeah.
gave it to me, and I was able to turn it in. So, I mean, I guess it's just where you live,
Yeah.
but
And,
hey,
and it is, and all these nuances state to state. And, the hope is with this compact, we get, I don't want you to change your nuances, but let's not make it hard for Shelby to go from point A to point B, right? Let's give her the opportunity to at least have a temporary practice somewhere until all of the boxes are ticked, if she's got no issues in the state that she's coming from. Now, I don't know how that would work with California, because they don't even have a licensing, right? So, like, you've never had a background check with where you're coming from there. But
yeah.
like, that might be the anomaly. Like, Texas, probably they're not on with most things that the NATA or BOC do right away. So maybe Texas and California and a handful of states aren't part. But if we could get, like, even 30 or 40 states, like, it would make a big difference in just helping athletic trainers be more mobile, be able to practice across state lines easier, do telemedicine. I mean, how much has changed in medicine, even in athletic training, through telemedicine that we can do. But then, am I supposed to get a license because my football player is now playing for the Tennessee Titans? Do I have to get a Tennessee license to get on a Zoom call with him and do an evaluation and work through kind of his care? Like, that makes no sense, right? So, I mean, we've got to step up with the times, and hopefully this compact will allow us to do a lot of that stuff.
Well, and I think also the frustrating part is, a lot of these states or districts and stuff are complaining about money and income. Put a $20 week temporary pass for somebody to come practice in your state. Like, not that we need to jab every athletic trainer that comes through, but those are ways to make money for your association and stuff. And, some don't even offer a temporary come in our state other than if you are with your actual team that you are hired by, which I think is nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, we had, an adjacent state at one point when Michigan changed their licensing law. We had to work with their board because the way they originally wrote it, anybody in Ohio that was traveling with a team into Michigan would have to get a Michigan license. And we were like, this is just, crazy. We have lots of collegiate conferences that cross borders. We've got and they didn't even realize it when they wrote it that way, right? So, there's lots of issues. There was something in what you just said that kind of took me to, I think my problem with the whole model of state district NATA, right, is we've got NATA, we've got districts that were originally designed based on football conferences, right? But the point was they were like mini NATAs, and then we had states set up mini NATAs in their states. So they're all doing the same things. Wouldn't it be fascinating if we could have the state organizations take their money and do continuing education local to you, where you wouldn't have to travel so far, and their focus is truly Con Ed. And then the monies that we send to GLATA or our district, right, whatever your district is, have a different function. And those monies are for other types of things. And then vice versa. Like, why is the NATA spending millions of dollars doing another Con Ed event? I've already had one in my backyard in my state. I've had one in my district. Now we're going to do it again. Like, do I really need to get 80 hours of CE in person every year? Or could we better spend the resources that we're sending to these groups and get them focused on different pieces of what we need as athletic trainers? Because in reality, the NATA should be focusing more like a national pack. And involved in and really entrenched in what's going on in DC and at the state level, what's going on legislatively, and advocating for athletic trainers. All of the monies that they're spending on all of these other things are things that could be done best locally. And cheaper for us as athletic trainers. Like, how many athletic trainers can fly to New Orleans for 5 days to get 27 CEs when I can go do the same thing at OATA in Cincinnati, which is only 60 miles down the road, right? Like, so let's let the Con Ed piece be more local and take that money we would spend and shift it to other priorities. And I don't hear anybody having that conversation about what truly is the function of the NATA. How is it different than your district? What's their function? And then also what's the local? And they should all be not doing the exact same things and be mini copies of one another and redundant to one another, but rather meeting the needs of athletic trainers at the different levels and the different things that they need.
Well, and that's what the NATA convention, I kind of asked that question, is what is the NATA's business? Like, what are they trying to do for our community? And I think the best thing that they do is the national convention where people can network. But everybody's time is tied up going to go get their CEUs. So I'm surprised that they don't have those, 3-hour pods of time where everybody just mingles and talks. And then the time that they have to socialize is a party at the end of the day, and it's dark and everybody's dancing and it's awkward. And there's drinks, but I mean, why wouldn't you have concentrated sessions to actually talk about different areas of athletic training and where people are having problems in their regions and stuff? That would be the best time for everybody to come together and talk.
Yeah. I mean, that's my point, is like, let's readjust. And I don't know what the answer is, right? Like, for each level, we could have a conversation about what that best thing is. but it certainly doesn't seem like redundant, state, GLATA, and national meetings doing basically the same things really fits much of a bill. Because if I can get the same thing at the state, why do I even need to be? And this is where I think the NATA gets frustrated. Why do I need to be a member of the NATA? I can be a member of the OATA or whatever, your Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania Athletic Trainers Association. I can get my CE here, right? Like, why? So that they missed the opportunity for that answer to be, you know what, the function of the NATA is different than the function of your OATA or your district, and here's what each of these different groups does for you as an athletic trainer, and then really focus your resources on those things instead of spreading yourself out and trying to do everything for everybody. Let's focus the resources at the different levels to the things that need impact and they can truly kind of impact.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I think it's a marketing question there. I remember I was taking a class from a guy who used to work for General Motors. And so General Motors, he was like, look, here's the deal. You can buy a good car from anybody today. It used to be, you differentiated the product. And I think that may be what you're identifying here is the challenge with NATA, is they're no longer providing that value added and accurately being able to say what differentiates them from the regionals. And it would make sense. I think your point there, Brian, is well taken, that if you are the national organization, pardon the air quotes, but if you're the national organization, then that is where you should be operating. So if you are working in DC and working with the state representatives and senators, that would be the perfect place to be floating this, hey, Alaska and Texas, you guys kind of have the same personality sometimes. Have you talked about sharing your legal frameworks? And like I said, in other industries, I know there are rafts of 14, 15 different states that are all sharing that information. So NATA could make themselves very valuable to everybody by being that piece that makes it all come together at the national level. And then the redundancy then comes from, if we need training and we don't, let's say it's an instructor issue, well, I can grab one from Michigan to work in Ohio because I know we're all on the same page. And especially in those border states.
Yeah, and a lot of the regulatory piece and the post-certification piece has actually been picked up. The ball's been picked up by Shannon at the BOC, right? So the Board of Certification, they're the credentialing, right? They're the entry-level credential organization. They provide us our board exam, right? I'm the chair of the board exam committee right now. And so I spent a lot of time with the BOC as well, but they've picked up a lot of that regulatory piece that in the framework you just described would be more left to the NATA, right? But I think because there's been a void there, the BOC's kind of stepped in and said, someone needs to shepherd. And so they have a regulatory conference where state boards come together and share information and all, and so you have a different organization that the purpose of that organization is much more geared towards, safety, entry-level practice, making sure our people are credentialed. Now starting to then get into continuing education and regulatory reform and all kinds of things beyond the original scope of what they were there for. And I think it's because there was a void there, right? Someone needed to fill that void, and they kind of stepped into it. And I think they've done a pretty good job of it. But the question is that best served, at the national level and having the NATA be that group doing that? Or at least in conjunction with the BOC, right? Spending their resources on that. I think that's where a lot of young athletic trainers, when I have conversations with them, they're so confused. They have no idea what's the NATA's role, what's the BOC's role, what they do, what they don't do, Katie and the educational side and what they do. And they just rail against, I've heard so many people talk about the BOC in ill ways. And I'm like, that's not the BOC. Like, you're complaining about the wrong people, right? Like, and they just don't even know what they don't know, right? Which is, again, a problem. How are you not educating your young professionals as to, what the distinct roles of these groups are? What's their goals? What are they trying to get accomplished? Who do I go to when I have a complaint for this or that, or I have questions about this or that? And people are just really misinformed.
And we find that in so many industries, though. Again, we were talking about the heart surgeon we were talking to earlier, and how specific his information is. But you see that in a number of different education areas, in that we get them very good at what it takes to do that job, but they don't necessarily understand how that job, the job they are doing, fits into the business of doing it. And so that, I used to work in supplying small shops with, all the things that you need to be in business. And there was nothing more common than a very, very good technician. I mean, these guys could fix things that I couldn't even. I was like, really? It does that? Well, great. I'm glad you fixed it. Way beyond my comprehension. And they could do it just seamlessly and without breaking a sweat. But when it came to their business being profitable and actually being able to support them as a professional or as a technician or a tradesman, they had no clue about that piece of it. So yes, I think you're onto a really great idea here, and that you can refine the focus of these different organizations so that you can get better results. If this is the national organization for, well, then let them do that. And if this is the guys who are taking care of accreditation, let them focus on that. And then obviously those guys have got to be sharing information so that they can all be building the same ship. But things are getting way too transparent to have the amount of waste we have in industries anymore. So
yeah, and redundancy, and I mean that's the thing. I just had coffee with a colleague in the OATA, our Ohio group, and he said, what's your view? I'm like, I just feel like we're all doing, NATA, GLATA, and OATA. Like there's so much groupthink and so much structure that's been embedded for years that no one sees that we're doing everything at a very mediocre level, instead of focusing our resources on a few things and doing it better, and allowing each other the different pieces of the puzzle to focus on different things, right? And really hone in on those. And I really think we could do a better job of saying, here's the role of the local group and here's what they should be focused on. And here's the role of the district group and here's what they should be focused on. And then I think it also would be a much easier sell to a young professional who's skeptical to say, well, why should I be a member of the NATA? Well, your funds are going to do political action things in DC and push your profession forward, and legislative issues and support for states. And that answer becomes very simple, right? It's what you're focused on. Right now, it's everything for everybody, right? It's like we can provide you with a young professionals group. Well, I have that in the OATA and I have that in the GLATA as well, right? Like they just, like, the same things trickle from one to down all the way down, and you get the same structure and the same group thing going on there. What are your thoughts, Shelby?
No, I think you hit it on the head. I'm glad that NATA is trying to be robust in their resources, but at the same time, I get lost in the weeds, basically, of, well, I don't know how to utilize all these things. And, half the time, my problem is just the website is so difficult to navigate for NATA also,
You're not supposed to be able to say that. You're the young person here who's supposed to be a digital native.
Well, I am, but when, your hyperlinks are the same color as the text, how am I supposed to find that?
Yeah. And the other thing I get very frustrated because I'm a seasoned professional now. I would consider myself in my last third of my career, right? So, and I've done a lot in athletic training, by far people have done more. But the thing that frustrates me by most is when we get this is the way we've always done it thing. Or, these people are just volunteers, right? You get that answer to questions all the time as well. I mean, that's not an excuse for, not being able to articulate a vision and a mission and what you're trying to accomplish to a young professional. When young professionals hear that, they tune you out.
It's a cop-out.
Yeah, and they can see right through it, right? And so, my issue with a lot of people at my stage is, Shelby wants a real answer here. They don't want you to dismiss their concern, but rather talk them through why. And yes, having volunteers may make it a bit more complicated or a bit more time consuming to get to the answer that you want. But you know what? Here's where we're going to go to get it. and this committee is going to meet at this time, and we're going to end up, this is going to be on the agenda, right? Like there's the structures that are in place are not excuses for not being able to provide services and articulate responses to people. And that's what I find very frustrating. I mean, I get a lot of questions about BOC things. I mean, if I get an email from the BOC, I'm a volunteer. I spend quite a bit of time every year of my volunteer experience with them. I'm going to respond to anything I get from them within 24 hours, right? Like no matter what's going on, if it's a concern someone has about the exam, and I'm the person with the answer, then, or I'm the person that has to review something about the exam to make sure that it's kosher, right? Then I'm going to spend the time to do it. And I think most of our volunteers are that way. I think people throw that out there to get people to stop asking questions that they don't know the answers to very well. And that's not that is not a recipe to get people on board with what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think we saw that in California. I mean, I just had a situation where we found an athletic trainer, well, an imposer athletic trainer who, had AI write his resume. I saw it. I was it was odd, but I was like, okay, maybe it was just a quick resume, whatever. And it ended up that he had lied to the whole community in the Fresno area that he was an athletic trainer. And it was quite a shock that nobody had connected the dots. But then it was, well, what are the repercussions of this guy that's acting as an athletic trainer and has been paid? And
that is the beauty of now having the legislation that they have, and their legislation isn't like what everyone thinks it is. It's not a law. It's not even a registration, right? It is truly title protection, which means no one who isn't an athletic trainer who has not passed the certification can say they're an athletic trainer. And so go forward, you should be able to report that to this group, and then they will reprimand them. Now, the question is, and this was the thing I always found frustrating as a board chair, if someone's not licensed by my board, what can I do to reprimand them? I can't revoke your license. I could send you a fine, but I hope you pay it, because if you don't, there's nothing I can do to get you to pay it, right? Like, so what's the ramifications of that? That I think the state needs to work out. Ultimately, a lot of times for us, it was getting the state attorney generals involved, and then they could talk about what the ramifications are those on the legal side of things in different ways. But at least now you have that protected, right? Which is like, so I'm not trying to poo-poo what California has, but I've had a lot of people tell me in the last 3 weeks, like, great, they passed a licensing law. No, they didn't. It's not a licensing law. It's a title protection law, and it's very different, right? Yeah. And it's no less valuable. It serves that purpose that you were just speaking to very well, which is you can't have somebody who is an EMT or someone who took a couple first aid classes walk their self down on a sideline and claim to be an athletic trainer. And I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Well, and that's what's worrisome is a lot of these emergency courses popping up for physical therapists is what I'm seeing. And it's, maybe 8 hours, maybe 2 days. I think I've seen it as 1 day. And, as a contracting company, I have a lot of PTs now approaching me like, oh yeah, I can work jujitsu. And it's like, I don't know how you're supposed to respond and adequately spine-borne somebody with 8 hours of experience. Like,
you'd almost rather have an EMT than someone with that little experience, right?
So that's the thing too.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we get the same thing, and we had a real problem in the state of Ohio for a while with, our licensing law was written that we could accept referrals from chiropractors. And then there were chiropractors that were getting their quote unquote, I'm going to do the air quotes thing, Randy, right? Sports medicine, certification or whatever they call it, like the add-on, which is a couple 100 hours of work. And I'm not trying to poo-poo it, but then trying to be on the sidelines team physicians, working with teams, which, we can argue about the value one way or the other of that and what it is, but it's certainly not the same as like my physician that was on my sideline that was a family practice doc who did a residency in sports medicine and then a fellowship in sports medicine and, really kind of spent multiple years developing those skills. I mean, they're not the same thing. And I don't envy you in your process of trying to hire people for these things. Particularly when you get into things like jujitsu. I did rodeo when I was younger. I've got a lot of friends in the X Games areas, like these high trauma things. Yes, athletic trainers, and there are certain athletic trainers that are way better prepared than others, right?
Yes.
For those. But sometimes the answer isn't an athletic trainer. It's putting an athletic trainer with a critical care emergency doc or
Yep.
a paramedic that's got certain types of training, or even in the context, like I was watching this Red Bull diving last year, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
they've got trained emergency medical divers in the water with those people. And so trying to find the right personnel with the right credentials that fill the voids that you need for the types of events you're putting on is not an easy task. And then getting people to do that on top of whatever they're doing for their jobs on the weekend and leave it becomes even more of a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember doing a commercial shoot when I was in LA. I did a lot of film coverage, set medic, and we were in the abandoned Hawthorne Mall, and it was a Nissan commercial for Thanksgiving. So they were running the cars in the mall, drifting up to the edge with no no railing or anything, and they're like, you know how to spine or like hold C-spine if they roll those or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I do, but I haven't done it in this context before. But
Yeah.
it was a confidence thing at that point. I had to show that I'll get it
Mhm.
figured out.
Yeah.
But it sometimes is getting experience on the fly too.
Yeah. I mean, and in those situations, like I want a fire department guy that knows how to work jaws of life then, right? Because we may have to cut a car open, and I certainly
Exactly.
don't have that skill set. So it's like, trying to think about all of the iterations of that. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
become complicated. And I think there's a lot of people talking about, and we can argue again, you've got Chad and Kaylee and their group talking about, there really isn't a shortage in athletic trainers. There's just a shortage of athletic trainers that want to do specific jobs. And to
Yeah.
some degree, I don't think they're wrong. But my point is, if you are doing something like you're doing, and athletic trainers are already overworked, what's how much time are they then willing to go on over and above to work an extra jujitsu thing, right? Like, and I
Exactly.
think that's where the real rub is a lot of people think that they should be able to just hang a PRN sign and find people, and it's not that easy because these
No.
people all have jobs, right?
Yeah. But then the pay is so low, they have to take the PRN job sometimes. So.
Yep. That's what I said. It just depends. And all that's. I think we're right in the quagmire of working through all that. I mean, we've gotten some really distinct changes in the job market in Ohio, where
Mhm.
athletic trainers who have traditionally been in high schools are leaving them in droves, and they're going to non-traditional settings where they're getting better work-life balance and better pay, and sometimes even huge signing bonuses. I mean, we have Amazon in our area, and then we also have a Honda plant up north that have started hiring athletic trainers, and they're giving them $10,000 signing bonuses, sometimes $25,000 raise, and they work for 410s, right? Like,
Mhm.
so you're working 40 hours a week in 4 days, and then you got your weekends free. Like, athletic trainers who have been in the secondary school setting for the last 10 years are going, oh, sign me up for that. I'm not doing baseball and softball all day long on the weekend and like away from my family. So there's this tension in the job market right now that it's going to be really interesting to see how it all shakes out. And I think, the people who squawk about, oh, the traditional setting's dying. I don't think it is. I think most athletic trainers would prefer to work in a traditional setting, but they're not going to do it at the abuse of themselves anymore for minimal pay and 60 to 80-hour work weeks. I think the traditional setting is going to have to change what their expectations of the athletic trainers are. And then I think they'll flock back because frankly, most of us got in this because we're interested
Mhm.
in working sports and working
Yeah.
with athletes, right? I would much rather do that than go work in the Amazon plant. But if you're having me pick between more salary and 410s and less salary and 80-hour week, like that's not even a decision for me.
Yeah.
And so we just got to see how the market shakes out over time, and I think it'll work itself out.
Well, it's a supply and demand.
Mhm.
I think that
Imagine that it's a marketplace.
wow, it's the business stuff we didn't learn in school. The
Exactly.
Econ
We could do
101.
we could do a whole nother podcast just on that, like trying
Oh
to
yeah.
start a cash-based practice like I did, and what I didn't know. Even, thank God I had a wife who, runs a company, because she kind of walked me through 99% of it. It's like, good Lord.
The best business partner.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Amen. Oh, my goodness. Well, that's probably about all the time we've got this week I guess we're not weekly, but for the podcast. So what do you guys got coming up that you're excited about? What are the next couple of events that you're excited about in your AT experience?
Well, I heard that EATA is coming up in January in Philadelphia, so I'm hoping to make an appearance there.
All right.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to going to DC to this compact group. We got a couple weeks till we get there. That'll be in November. I'm traveling the country teaching dry needling classes, between now and the holiday. I had a rough summer this summer with my father-in-law passing away, so I pushed off a lot of my classes to the back third of the year, and so now I'm on the road a lot, which is just it's fine. It's fun. I mean, I love getting in the classroom and teaching, clinician skills, and so I'm looking forward to that. But this compact thing will be really interesting. Like we're a couple weeks away from actually like putting pen to paper and starting to flush out what this thing's going to look like, and I'm excited about that.
So, Brian, if somebody wanted to book you for instruction on the dry needling, how do they get a hold of you?
The structureandfunction.net. If you go to our webpage there's a button in the upper right corner for upcoming classes. And they're both dry needling, but also joint manipulation classes, fascial manipulation classes. We also have an online platform that's pretty kind of high-end clinical information. So like lots of your Con Ed needs can be met at structureandfunction.net.
Outstanding. Shelby, how about you? If somebody wants to get involved with To the Bone, where do they go?
The website, tothebonepodcast.com. You can write in at the bottom, and it should send me an email if you're interested to talk about athletic training stuff.
Outstanding. So I got one more for you. This is your dad humor to take with you on a Sunday. Why did the pastor encourage the entire congregation to get dry needled? So they'd be more holy.
On that note, I think we should leave.
Outstanding. Brian, thank you so much for being with us. Shelby, always a pleasure to see you.
Yep.
Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It's hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.